Hopefully this will work. And I think it is going live. Fingers crossed. You never know with tech. Okay, awesome. So colleagues in the chat, if you can confirm we are live on our social media channels, that would be great. And for those of you in the room, we'll be kicking off in just one more minute here. If you are joining us on any of the social media channels, you can ask your questions and we will make sure that those questions get relayed over to us live here with Chukwu, and we'll be able to answer them live here in this session. For any of you who are live with us on Zoom, again, another reminder that we'll be first looking at any Q&As and doing our best to answer those as we go. And then if we have time, we'll go back and go through the chat at the end of the session. So without further ado, it does look like we are time to kick off our session. And there's Chukwu's bio, which we probably don't need up right now. Joyce. Well, I need it up to give you an amazing introduction to Chukwu, who's got an amazing background of experience, and his story is a testament to dedication, education, and giving back to the community. He was born in Winnipeg, and he's good friends with our colleague Rachel Stedman, who many of you may know has a storied past in Winnipeg as well. But he was raised in Tobago, where he completed his high school education sort of across both countries, I guess, Chukwu. And he's pursued further education at the University of Manitoba, where he focused on economics, business, and commerce, followed by studies in business administration at the Red River College. His early career saw him working in government with the federal law enforcement before transitioning into what he's here to talk about today, real estate, where he's led, and I love the name of this company, Sherlock Holmes, as his team as a broker for over a decade. And he's achieved amazing reviews online. I think your average is 4.9, which is even better than our Google reviews, so I'm jealous there. And hitting the top sales and many team awards as well. He's deeply committed to his community, and he's founded the Afro Canadian Real Estate Society, or ACRES, to empower Canadians of African ancestry with knowledge on real estate ownership, aiming for economic stability and security. And his most recent work was spotlighted on CBC and their marketplace as part of their Face Racism series, showcasing his efforts in seeking justice in communities and the marketplace. And under his leadership, Sherlock Holmes has flourished, with members becoming award-winning realtors, and his dedication extends beyond his team, where he provides training to other team leads and realtors across the country. He's currently expanding his vision to Merida, the Yucatan, with an aim of modernizing real estate processes there, reflecting his continuous pursuit of empowerment and real estate. And I realized I did all that, Chukwu, without advancing my slides so people can see the important bullet points on your background. Oh, geez.
You know what? I think it's absolutely fine.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us, and welcome to our weekly or bi-weekly show here at CPA4IT, where our mission is to help our clients organize their finances, create wealth, and transform wealth into a legacy. And I really believe real estate investment is an amazing tool to helping clients create wealth and transform that wealth into a legacy. So for those of you, the sort of planned agenda, and we're going to keep this loose and have lots of free-flowing dialogue, but we want to talk about an introduction to the real estate investment landscape, an economic overview of the current market, investment opportunities here in Canada and potentially abroad, the risks and challenges associated with real estate investment, as well as some success stories and case studies, and how, of course, if you're interested, you could get started as a potential investor. So that's all we have for our slide deck. So we're keeping it nice and simple. Again, Chukwu, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. And like I said, I'm really excited to have a conversation with you because of this amazing success that you've had internationally. And I guess the first question on a lot of people's minds is we've heard a lot of talk here in Canada about the capital gains proposal that was part of the budget and its potential impact on investing in general, but particularly real estate investing. And I wonder from your perspective as a real estate investor, not asking you to answer any tax questions per se, but what are your thoughts on how this will impact the market, or has it already begun to impact the market?
Okay, so far I haven't seen an immediate impact, but there will be one. I believe that there should be one happening soon. I think the changes are penned for what, June 25th or something along those lines this year, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I'm gonna put myself in someone's shoes. So let's say, for instance, I'm trying to sell my multi-residential property, right? And I'm realizing I'm gonna be taking a significant hit. I have really two options. I can try to offload it as soon as possible, or I can just not sell it. So in terms of what the immediate impact, I can imagine some people trying to offload their properties immediately before that date happens. And I expect to be a small, what do you call it? Let's say a slight increase in the amount of people, on the amount of sales, attempted sales being done within the Toronto market or within the GTA. Now, in terms of the long run, I can see some, if I was a seller, I might just not want to sell at all. In terms of buying though, right? If I knew that I had options, and that's the issue. Most people don't know they have options. They just want to sort of like buy something that's close to them because of fear. Now, if I were a buyer and I knew about nothing else, I may not want to invest in real estate in Ontario, because it would not make any sense. Why would I buy something knowing that by the time I want to sell it, that there's going to be a higher tax impact and it's going to affect me in the long run? It wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And the whole rule of thumb when it comes to investment is to always try to find a better alternative. So yeah, that has to be a big factor.
And the way I sort of see this is it's an opportunity, because if there's a lot of people flying to the market, supply and demand dictates that we should see a correction in prices. Prices are already low because of interest rates. There's been a lot of hope that the Bank of Canada would drop their interest rates, but we really haven't seen that. All they've done is hold steady. And so I think a lot of people, as a result, have held off of buying. There's people who have mortgages who are coming up for renewal where interest rates are double. I know for myself, I just renewed in April, and my interest rate literally doubled. And I'm fortunate that I've got the means to be able to cover that, but there's a lot of people who can't. And so that really means that there's going to be potentially more product coming on the market, which could mean a drop in prices, which could mean an incredible opportunity for those people who are looking at buying, right? And so I think that could be a potential opportunity from my perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so the way I see it more in terms of a balanced market happening. So the key thing to a balanced market, okay, so right now, if I'm looking at the entire market altogether, it's way towards a buyer's market. So without a doubt, it's a buyer's market. It's very clear based on the amount of supply that's out there in the market and the sales and all that. However, what we've noticed really is that people are coming in the market of belief that interest rates are going to drop. Doesn't mean it will in personal people, but belief that it's going to drop, more people beginning to buy, right? So the thing is that when I'm noticing a buyer's market, the key thing is that if the amount of people trying to sell their property should also match the amount of people trying to buy their property. So there are two factors. Yes, interest rates went up, people can't afford their properties and all that, but some of them are holding on to the properties with the hope that interest rates will drop in the future, which will make their payments cheaper. Then you have the buyers who are coming into market who are saying, hey, wait a minute, interest rates could be dropping. And before the bidding wars start, maybe I should buy this property before things get crazy. So that's where that balanced market. So I see it being somewhat balanced. I think that in terms of the price dropping, I can see it sort of staying around the same for a little bit longer, but it's going to go up soon. I would say by the second the Bank of Canada says, you know what, we're going to drop it by 0.25%, it will skyrocket.
Right. Yeah, because once they do that first cut, the assumption will be more cuts will follow. And
Correct.
so that'll create the flood that's, it'll break the dam that's been holding back all the potential purchasers. But I guess
Exactly.
that then merits the next question,
Mhm.
looking at the GTA or even Ontario or even Canada as an investment opportunity versus the rest of the world. I know obviously you've been focusing a lot on Merida and the Yucatan Peninsula. Leaf international, whole why the Yucatan that maybe the average person may not be aware of.
Yeah, no worries. When it comes to investment, ideally, what you want to do is you want to catch it on the way up, right? As much as possible. You'd rather not buy an investment at the peak of it. Doesn't really make any sense. Everything goes in cycles. So I went to Merida pretty much on a whim. I heard it was one of the safest places in the Yucatan, one of the safest places in all of Latin America. It was really, I believe it was top 5. So I was really looking at it more of a safety thing with the family, something a little bit different, something that wasn't Canada. The standard of living is extremely high, and not to mention it's extremely affordable. So from a family moving from Canada, as you can see with high inflation, the cost of food, etc., moving to Yucatan, it makes perfect sense. Now, when I got over there and you start meeting with other realtors and developers, etc., then you start seeing it from a different point of view. You're realizing the what do you say it? The way to enter the easier than what it is in Toronto. Like for instance, if you want to buy a home in Toronto, a detached average price right now is what 1.3 million is the base. If you want to buy a detached home, a similarly constructed detached home in Merida, it might cost you approximately 250 to 300,000 Canadian. So you're comparing
Yeah,
one
for
versus the other.
1.3, you're getting beachfront condo, right?
Exactly. So when you look at it, the standard of living, the cost of living, right? Your food cost is significantly lower. When you're looking at we can get into it a lot better. Let's just say in terms of the return on your investment for renters, the other thing that scared me on this side was stories like we were selling properties with tenants inside of it. And that whole
Yeah.
cash for keys thing just scared the living daylights out of me and my clients. That doesn't exist in Mexico. So if you want the light reason, the easiest way to describe it is just a better market. A lot of expats are moving to Merida because it's safe. A lot of other Mexicans from other cities are going to Merida because it's safe. So the property prices are increasing at a substantial rate. It's averaging, I know right now this year is going to be 6.5%. Last couple of years it's been 10%, 12% compared to Toronto, right? So the values are going up are going up. The rents are also going up. The net rental yield is actually higher in Merida than it is in Toronto, right? Anyone who bought commercial properties knows that you don't really it's not a good cap rate here. So from an investment
Right.
standpoint, it makes sense. From a safety standpoint, it makes sense. Your taxation, property tax is significantly lower. You're comparing like $500 for the entire year versus like 10 grand or 6 grand or whatever it is. It's not the same. It's not even close.
Yeah. So obviously easier to get into the market from a cost perspective.
Correct.
But what about, the big fear for a lot of people are the logistics
Mm,
of getting involved in a foreign country where maybe they don't speak the language. How do you
right.
overcome those obstacles for investors?
Well, this is where your circles are very important. Networking, right? Networking, meeting people, finding someone you can trust. Now, I have trust issues. I could tell you this. When it comes to money and people, it's not my thing, right? It's one of those things where you just show me first, show me that you know what you're talking about, show me that you have some experience, show me that you've done exactly what you're saying. So that's how I operate. So the key thing to this, it's knowing the right people. If you don't know the right people to explain things to you, you're going to have a very difficult time. Not to mention, you need to have an idea of what it is that you're looking for. I can show you investment opportunities for 250, 300,000, 500,000. I can show you a fixer-upper property, etc. But unless you know your own capabilities, you're going to have a very difficult time anywhere, whether it's Toronto or anywhere in the world. So you need to
Right.
know what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, believe it or not, we've got our first barrage of questions that have come in from one of our
I can imagine.
contacts. Now he's got some tax-based questions, which we'll do our best to answer as well. So he's got 3 questions here, and I'll read them out first, and then we'll do our best to answer them. And we've got some more coming in as well. So Joe is asking, what if we sell the property and take back a mortgage? Do we still have a capital gains, or I would only declare the yearly income due to the mortgage? So no, in vendor take back, which is becoming more and more popular. So one of the common things happening right now is transfer of ownership of secondary properties from one generation to another. One of the ways that's often done is with a vendor take back, but you still effectively have a deemed disposition, you have a sale, you have a capital gain that will be attributable to whoever was the original owner, whether that is the corporation or whether that is an individual. So unfortunately, Joe, yes, you would have a capital gain there. And in addition, you would also have yearly income on the interest that you have as well. So you have both the capital gain and ongoing interest income as well from the interest on the vendor take back. Now you might have associated costs with maybe you're borrowing the money yourself and you have your own costs, but yes, you do have a capital gains. The next question from Joe is, what are the corporate tax implications of purchasing then selling in Merida or in Florida? So the issues, I mean, the implications of any property that you buy or sell is that it is taxable as a capital gain, unless you are in the business of real estate and it's your primary source of business. And quite frankly, it's really difficult to be able to get it as eligible business income. It's normally going to be a capital gain. And that's going to be true whether it is in Canada, the US, or Mexico. There's going to be some foreign tax. Again, to be brutally honest, I do what filings you've had to deal with the research, but I don't know the answer right now, to be honest. And then his last question is, do we purchase personally or through the corp? And that there's pros and cons of both. So first of all, right now let's set aside the capital gains exemption issues that have been proposed with the budget, and because we don't have any legislation yet, and how it rolls out might be different from what's been talked about in the budget. So let's set that aside for a second and just realize that you would have a capital gain, and based on the old rules, you're going to pay tax on 50%. That is the same in a corporation as well as personally. The difference is that in a corporation, it's a set rate at about 28% roughly. It's 38%, but then there's an abatement, comes out to around 28% inside the corporation here in Ontario. Different for each provinces. Personally, the tax rate that you're going to pay on that 50% will be dependent on your marginal income. And it could be at the lowest tax bracket, or it could be all the way at the top, which is as high as 54%. So depending upon what your income is, there is some potential advantages of investing inside the corporation and getting that 28.8 versus whatever your personal tax rate is. Now, for most people in and around the 100,000, you would be probably very similar in tax rates. But the other advantage of a corporation is that it's going to bring is if you had earned a bunch of money inside of a corporation and you wanted to take it out to invest personally, then that's going to have to become income to you unless you're doing some sort of fancy insurance maneuver. But you're going to have to take that into income, which is going to have tax implications there. Whereas if you've got the money retained in the corporation, the corporation is investing, there's no cost to getting that money out. So that's one of the big differences there that you'll have with the corporation. But again, what I would say is for anyone who's considering real estate investing, who is a client of ours, before you go ahead and pull the trigger on anything, I would seek your accountant's advice and talk to them about your specific situation. Because there are some other factors as well to consider, such as the cost of borrowing. And I don't know, again, much about the Merida and Mexico or other countries like the Dominican Republic, where I know my stepbrother's invested a fair bit. But here in Canada, you typically are going to pay a higher rate if you are borrowing money from your corporation. And that's largely because it's far easier to bankrupt a corporation than an individual. So the bank has more risk, so they charge you a higher rate. So that's something to be aware of. So again, pros and cons, speak to your representative about your specific situation, and they'll be happy to do that for you. So we've got another question here from Sharon, which says, "Hi, as a Canadian living in Canada, owning a foreign property will automatically trigger a capital gain. How much will be the hit?" So owning a foreign property itself does not trigger a capital gain. An event triggers a capital gain, like the sale of a property. So again, maybe one of the misconceptions about capital gain, if you were talking, you're not when you sell them, whether it's on state, is going your cost or your book value. So if you bought something for 500,000 and you sold it for 600,000, you have a capital gain of 100,000. And then you would pay tax on, again, going by the old rates, 50%. 50% of it is completely tax-free. That is potentially, and again, to answer another questions of Joe's that's already coming up, is that he asks, I assume the personal capital gains is 100% at personal tax rate and corporate capital gains is 67% at corporate rate. And so no, it's the same 50% corporation, 50% personal under the old rules. Under the new rules proposed in the budget, which is not in law yet, there's no legislation yet, but what our lovely liberals have proposed is that it's going to be 67% or 66.666% on anything over 250,000. So in that situation where you made a gain of 100,000, you would pay at 50%. But if you had made 300,000, if you'd sold for 800 and you made a $300,000 capital gain, then 250 would be at 50% and 50,000 would be at the 67%. Now, one big thing that I don't like about the budget and that the doctors have screamed at the top of their lungs from is that $250,000 exemption is per taxpayer and not available to a corporation. So that's something to be aware of. Again, I'm a bit hesitant to lock in on that because I know there are potential changes before this becomes law or legislation. And I'm hoping that even if they stick with this 67%, that it will be at least there'll be the same exemption for a corporation that there is for individuals. Now, the other thing to be aware of for individuals is that, as I said, it's per taxpayer. So if you have a husband and a wife, that's a total of 500,000 each. Again, assuming that the properties are jointly owned. So 50% by you, 50% by your spouse. So sorry, Chukwu, I guess I fielded all of those.
Oh no,
Do you
I
have
can,
any thoughts or
can.
comments on any of those?
Yes, I can add a little bit of context to it. So we did have a client a foreign client that actually did sell their property. And one of the questions were asking for the capital gains tax from the Mexican side. So when it comes to the taxation, when you buy something, there isn't like a sales tax or anything. It's deferred. That's like weird. That's what ours is. So it's about, if you're a non-resident, I think it's about 35%, but they always encourage you to register for something called an RFC, and they always encourage you to be a resident of Mexico in some manner. So I believe that you have an exemption on your primary property for almost about $500,000. So as long as you don't make more than that, you're fine. Anything outside of that, I think it's up to 25% or something along those lines. So don't quote me on that one, but I remember it was explained to me by the notary. So the notary handles everything involving capital gains in Mexico, and that is the ballpark range. So primary residence, you have an exemption up to approximately 500,000. If it's like a second property or an investment property or anything along those lines, it'd be somewhere between 25 to 35%. So that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, and just so people are aware, it's not that on top of what you're paying here in Canada.
No.
So, as long as you're still resident for Canada for tax purposes, you're responsible for paying taxes here in Canada. There are tax treaties with many countries, including Canada and Mexico, in which you will get credit for any taxes that have been paid in the other country. So if there's any withholdings in Mexico or the United States, you'll get credit for those here in Canada for what's been paid down there. However, you are on the hook for paying the greater of the two, which in 99.9% of situations, it's going to be Canada is the greater tax obligation than certainly Canada or Mexico. The same with, Dominican Republic or any other potential investment thing. So unless you're leaving Canada for tax purposes, unfortunately, some of the tax benefits that you would, if you were non-resident, you'd be paying, hey, only 35% sounds amazing to me. I guess there is a limitation of only 500,000 on the capital gains exemption for your primary residence, which here in Canada, we are still thankful that you still get 100% capital gains exemption on your primary residence. That is not universal. For those of you who don't know, there are many countries that do not give you a full capital gains exemption, including the US. So that is one of the few things we can be thankful for that thankfully the Liberals haven't taken yet.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, yeah, don't say that.
All of a sudden, woo!
Yeah, woo, gone. Well, and there's been fear of that, and I don't want to get onto a political discussion because it's really easy for me to get onto the Liberals because they've done nothing but damage to the middle class since they've come into power. But I digress.
Right.
One more question that's popped up, and then we'll jump back into the discussion. Says, so through the corp, the capital gains is 38%, then an abatement brings it down to 28%. Is this applied to the 50% now or the 67% in June? That is absolutely correct. So that is the tax rate that you would pay on the 50% currently, or after June, the 67%. And so the one thing, what my recommendation is, and again, not specific to real estate, but if you're owning stocks, because particularly with stocks, one of the big issues is that people have been sitting on large unrealized capital gains. And now is the time to realize those gains before June 25th. Who knows, maybe things will be changed, but I'd say better safe than sorry. I personally would be looking at locking in any unrealized capital gains and potentially then taking that money and putting it into other investment opportunities, because what I can say is I do tend to agree with Chukwu in that looking beyond Canada's borders brings a whole bunch of benefits. First of all, it's sort of a hedge against, you've got a currency hedge built in there as well. And for most of us, our largest investment that we own is physical real estate here in our primary residency in Canada. And while I've always loved real estate, and anyone who knew my father knows that he's loved real estate and real estate investing in various forms over his career, that a bit of diversity, whether that's even just geographic diversity, can help, because if there is a bubble, which who knows whether there is or is not, but if there is a bubble here in Canada, diversifying your risk across another country while still staying in something tangible, which I know a lot of people really like about real estate, is the tangibility of being able to physically go down and walk in and see, like, this is what I own, as opposed to like something like a REIT or something like that. And I think that international aspect brings some diversification, which helps, hedge and protect your portfolio. Is that, again, one of the reasons why you've looked for foreign countries, or?
Yes, ideally, because the thing about it, right, is that yes, the property values in the last 5 years in Toronto, I think it exceeded 30-something%. So, not to mention, it's so difficult to even buy a secondary property when it comes to mortgage qualification here. It's almost impossible, right? I think back in the days, you can buy a second one for 5% down. Now it's 20% down, and every subsequent property, it's even significantly harder to even qualify for it. They just don't want to give you the money. So the thing about it is that one of the reasons why I went by is that, okay, you know what? I can buy something in Mexico. I can rent it out, and that's the other thing. I probably shouldn't be telling a tax person this. You can also get paid in cash, right? In some cases, right? Bad.
No.
Don't do that. Always point every single thing, especially for FCPS, right? So you can actually, when you buy something, I always look for a country that tends to be stable. And what I like about Merida, right, is like, you see on TV, you see Mexico, you see the cartels and everyone shooting everybody. Doesn't happen in Merida. It's extremely, extremely safe. But that's the first thing, right? Would I let my family live there? Yes, they're there right now. Second thing is that I want to make sure that other than the country being safe, I want to make sure the government is somewhat stable. I don't want to see crazy policy changes like what we're happening with the Liberals right now. I want to make sure that everything is sort of, just normal, just regular, nothing to really screw me over. And what I like about Mexico when they're building their properties is that if you ever been to Texas and you've seen people, well, Mexican people build properties, they're very quick, they're very efficient, it's very professional. What I like about be living in Mexico is that you can actually see the work being done. Not to mention, most developers would not even sell that property at all until it's almost 67 to 70% complete. So you're not walking in there like, over here, you're investing in the property, you're buying a pre-construction, but you're just buying a hope and a dream. So all of a sudden, when things fall apart, there's nothing being built and there's no money. It's gone, right? Over there,
Right.
you're actually seeing units already ready to be sold. So they tend to take their money, develop it up until a certain point, and then they ask for investors to come in. So therefore, you can walk there, you can see it, it's tangible. You can walk into the unit and see it yourself, and then they do it. So that's why it feels a lot safer. I don't have to worry about the LTV, right? That's a complete bloody mess. If you have a rental property and someone doesn't pay, you just remove them. Simple as that. And the rents are very comparable.
Cartel, right? No.
It's called a yeah, pretty much. They'll just run you right out. Yeah, it's actually very well organized. I'm actually very surprised. I didn't know what to expect. Like I said, I used to work for law enforcement. I really used to deport people for a living. So I had the wrong preconceptions about Mexico. And when I saw Merida, it just blew me away. It's like North America. It's everything. The beach is there. Yeah. It's a good spot.
Yeah, and I think you make a really real point about what's going on in Canada with the renters tribunal board. I hear 2 years before you even have a case. We've heard horror stories, of paying for keys, of doing everything you can, and people's entire livelihoods being destroyed because interest rates are going up and they got zero income coming from these properties as the tenants are damaging and destroying the value that they have in these properties, which is a scary thing. So having a little bit more control over it there is interesting. We do have another question from Karen, which we'll come to in just a second. But I also had another question. You mentioned earlier the cap rates and that, yeah, in Ontario, the cap rates are, not very good. Hovering around, if not below, the cost of borrowing. So if you have to borrow, you're banking everything on your capital gain, right?
Correct.
And making no income at all. What are the cap rates like in Mexico? And maybe we should explain cap rate for those who don't know and understand what a cap rate is.
Yeah, I don't have the cap rate. It's basically net income divided over the value. But I don't have the cap rates for Merida available. What I do have is the net rental yields. That's what I have available. So when it comes to rental properties,
okay.
Essentially, how do I explain this? The way to calculate it is if you take your income for the entire year, because we're talking about investment properties, most of the time with rentals. It's your annual rental income. You deduct all of your expenses, and then you divide it by the value of the property, right? So if we're comparing Merida versus Toronto, I think Toronto, the rental yield is approximately about it's about 2 to about 7%, but normally it's about 4%. It shouldn't be too far off from the cap rate. Now, if you're looking in Merida, your averages tends to be somewhere around the 5 to about 9 range. So your average is about 6.7%, if I'm not mistaken. So it's about 2% higher. So it is generally higher around about 2%. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if you're calculating it works.
Yeah, and now so we'll actually maybe I'll go to Karen's question now before asking my next question. It's just I've got so many of my own, but we'll go to Karen's question here, which she's wondering if you have a team of people in working Merida that can assist with an RFC registration, like a notary. She's a Mexican herself, but her husband is Canadian. And would her husband also require to have an RFC as well in order to purchase a property in Merida?
So the husband is Mexican, or I missed that
No,
part?
husband's Canadian. Husband's Canadian,
okay.
She's Mexican.
The husband Canadian, honestly, I would just refer to a notary on that one. I can get the answer for you on that. I don't want to give you wrong information on it. But I do know, I can tell you this, when you're buying the property, I do recommend getting the RFC. It's a lower tax rate. And I'm pretty certain it's mandatory for non-Mexicans to get it. I can't imagine you not getting one. I'm pretty certain you have to get one in order to buy a property.
What is an RFC?
It's how do I describe it? It's almost like a register. It's a tax registration. Like that's really what
Okay,
it is.
it's like an
So you
ID of
go to the
sorts, like,
more or less like anytime you buy any sort of property or you open up a business or anything along those lines. In some cases, in some banks, if you want to have a bank account, you need to open up an RFC. I can't remember what the actual name is in Spanish, but it's an RFC. It's just an ID that you need for anything, like a tax filing or whatever it is.
yeah,
It's for them to
like
claim
a business
taxes.
number equivalent here in Canada.
More like a tax number, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense to me, who's the
Yeah.
accountant here in the group, but yeah, I get
Yeah.
it. So it's, yeah,
Mexican tax ID is the best description.
yeah. It's a way for the government to identify you. Um, and and so with yourselves, what type of properties are you personally looking at in Merida? Are you buying single family homes? Are you buying multi family dwellings? Are you condos? What's the ideal market in Merida
The ideal, okay,
from
what
an
I
investor
personally like,
standpoint? Obviously.
from an
Yeah.
investor standpoint, it really depends on what you're into. Okay, so some investors that we've had, actually, I already been mostly European, they do like the new builds, right? I haven't seen too many Canadians on it. I realize that most of the Canadians, from the investment standpoint, they tend to go for properties that are more coastal. So if you buy pretty much any rental property that's close to the coast, that's where they want to go. If you buy any rental property that's close to the center, it's called Central. It's almost like a New York sort of vibe. That's where they're buying. So if you buy anything in those two areas, the single family homes, maybe 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms, that's where they're going. And that's to attract most Canadians. If you're looking for multi-residential properties, you tend to get locals. Now, keep in mind that the average income in Merida is about $500 US, right? So I personally don't like doing multi-residentials. If you buy it outright, you'll still get your money, but I mean, your rents tend to be significantly lower, maybe $800, $900 every single month. Now, if you're looking to try to get a higher amount, you cater to foreigners, right? So you can get rents of anywhere between 2,000 to almost 5,000. So I'll probably say it really depends on how much you have to invest. Multi-residential, that's significantly higher. It will take you a longer time in order for you to break even. But on average, from what I'm seeing, if whether you buy a brand new development, whether you buy something that's coastal, whether you buy something that's in the center, break even tend to be on the 11-year mark. That's when you pretty much have the entire thing paid off.
Mm-hmm.
So if you consider that to a 25-year, 30-year amortization, it's like pretty quick.
Yeah, that it's and yeah, I think now with the tools like Airbnb and VRBO, it's far easier. Now, usually with these properties, are people managing themselves? Are they having local property managers? How would they deal with that aspect of making sure everything's being done if they're having turnover with rentals?
Okay, I'll strongly recommend getting yourself a property manager. So the rate on average from what I'm seeing is approximately 10%. So we're moving into that field. We do handle like a few properties for people over there, but I'm trying to get more agents in order to do it. Like I said, the way they handle real estate is very different from what we do in Canada. There is no real estate designation. You can wake up in the morning and say, I'm a realtor, right? So that's what I'm trying to change on that side. It's very annoying. So yeah, you can do it for 10%, seems to be normal. If you see anything around the 7 to 10, 7 range or anything lower, you might be a little bit careful, but it's normally about 10%. But keep in mind is that the mentality of the people, they're very honest. And what I'm seeing so far, that's why I said low crime rate is because of the way that they're thinking. So if you hire yourself a gardener, landscaper, etc., you can hire yourself a security guard. Remember, the annual income is low. So I don't want to say like it's a bad thing, but if you think of it, 500 US to pay someone pretty much full time, you can technically hire someone to babysit your property from $500. And if you trust that person, they will give you a report exactly what's going on. Now, if you're talking about your expenses and hiring a gardener and and so forth, then that's where the 10% management fee comes in. So you have options.
Right. Yeah. So interesting. So now what about if you are looking at, a larger investment and you needed to borrow for that investment? I'm going to assume that you're not going to a Mexican bank to get a mortgage. Is that a safe assumption? Are you having to use equity that you might have in like a line of credit locally? How does financing work if you're looking at a foreign property?
Okay, it really depends on if you're a resident or not. If about it, not good. Okay, it could happen, but it's highly unlikely. if you're not, in other words, you do temporary, you don't have a permanent residency, as well refinance property in Canada, it's the better option. And the interest rates, I think the mortgage rates are about 12%, 11.69 or 12% in Mexico. So if you really think about it from a I guess economic standpoint, financial standpoint, it makes more sense to leverage refinancing your property and then buying that property over in Mexico. It makes more sense in cash completely. If you're a permanent resident, yes, you can get a mortgage, but it depends on what's being offered. You may have to put down 35% down and then get mortgage. But again, if you already have a property or you have investments in Canada, you're paying 6%, 5% and all that. I personally don't see the logic in actually getting a mortgage for double the amount. It doesn't, I don't think it makes sense. You're a tax person. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah,
but that's how you do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but I know it's a question that always comes up is how to arrange for financing if they need it. And usually the key is to borrow against the equity that you built up in your local properties, if not paying cash. And it sounds like even if you could get it, the interest rates make it not make sense, right? So the only reason that you would take 12% is if you had no other way of getting access to the funds. And even then, I would think on the secondary market up here in Canada, you might be able to even get close to 12%. But again, question for a mortgage broker, we'll get on another show for sure.
No worries.
And so, are there any opportunities available right now? Are there any particular products that or properties that you're looking at that people might be interested in?
Yeah, there are a few of them. I don't have a slideshow or anything available. We have a fair bit of, we call them, well, super developers. I don't know how to translate it properly in any way, but in English, I guess super developers. So these are the major developers in the Yucatan, and they normally have different projects depending on where it is in the city. So you have some that are very close to the beach, that are walking distance to the beach, close to Progreso. That's a well-known port around here. You also have opportunities in central, no, not central, sorry. The name will come to me after. But yes, you do have different new developments available. So some of those are pretty good. Not to mention they allow you to make payments very similar to new builds across here. So you can pay it off over the 3-4 year span or 1 year span, depending on how soon it is. So that's one option. Multi-residentials, I mean, it really depending if you're going to park your money and just get cash flow over a longer period of time. That's also an opportunity. And yeah, you can easily buy a property and just rent it out. So you're right about the Airbnb and you're right about the VRBO. A lot of people, when they're coming over here, they don't just buy on the first year. They at least want to check it out for at least a year or 6 months or 3 months to just see if they really like it, to see if they can enjoy it. So there's a very strong market for that business. So if you want to buy a property, you get it furnished. Remember, I think it's pretty much cheaper, right? You can get Airbnb. We had one Mexican, she's Mexican Canadian, and she lives in Barrie. And one of the properties that we rented out for her, she bought it for about we converted about 240,000 Canadian. And right now she's having it rented out for about 50,000 pesos. I can't remember the calculation in my brain, but it's at least a couple of grand, like $3,000 or something along those lines. So she's making an absolute killing, and she got someone from Germany to rent it out furnished for 50,000 pesos. I'll have to, if someone can calculate into Canadian, that's what she's making right now. Like, that's can't do it right now. But she's making some good coin. So the market definitely is there. If you want to cash flow, you can do extremely well. It depends on what you're looking for, as in anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's interesting because, real estate, you don't typically think of generating good cash flow unless you're looking at something like a REIT, or, something like that would be generating a monthly return. It's usually banked on the capital gain primarily. But I guess that's the other advantage that you have when you're looking at countries like Mexico and the Dominican Republic, is because they're vacation spots where foreigners are coming in to rent. You've got basically leverage over the costs, and you've still got the ability to get the capital gain as well. And what have you seen historically? Like, what have you seen as far as capital gain type of growth on these properties over Mexico? Because the economy has obviously been doing well.
It is completely, yeah, it is.
Yeah. So is it, even with the last, like, if we look at the 5 and 10-year trends, what type of annualized, gains are we seeing in the market as far as the capital gain growth? Is that
okay? In the gains, yeah, actually, I pulled it up. One of my realtors from Odette got it for me just yesterday. In 2021, she was saying that the average home increased by almost 12%, 2022, 11%, 23, 8%, and this year they're estimated 6.5%. And if you were to compare the dollar, the Mexican dollar compared to, I mean, I got hurt by this one. The Mexican peso actually rose compared to the Canadian dollar. So, so it's not good if you're Canadian, your dollar is actually getting worth less. I wonder why.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your property values are actually going up because of that valuation, change of valuations. In other words, if you bought something years ago, it's actually worth more because of our dollar, because of the exchange rate.
Our dollar's going down because we're printing money. That's what happens when you print money.
And get me started on monetary policy in this place.
So here's the answer: 50,000 pesos is worth about 4K.
Okay, that's right. Okay, $4,000. Yeah, if I know
4K a month. Great. That's great income even for Toronto, right?
I know.
You know, and obviously you know there's seasonality and there's peaks and valleys with that. And now there's also the benefit of potentially enjoying the property there as well, right? And going down and staying at the property. The one caveat I always do say to people, if it's a corporate investment, that I do strongly encourage you to pay for your time at your own property, just so that we can keep that arm's length distance and we can prove that it's still a valid investment, because we don't want the government coming back and saying, well, we don't think this is a investment property. You're getting personal benefit out of it. And so we tend to be a little bit more conservative there when it is in the corporation, but there is that potential to have a spot. Like I know my stepbrothers who bought in Dominican, again, a little bit different than Merida. And they bought into a unique property where basically, and I don't know, maybe they have these in Merida too. But basically it was in a big development. They buy into the property, and then the property goes into that property's rental pool, and they take care of absolutely everything, and they give them a guaranteed 10% return on their property, so long as they leave it in the pool for a certain number of weeks, and then they get something like 12 weeks throughout the year that they can take anytime that they want to go and enjoy the property. They get a 10% return, plus they get the capital gains appreciation. Have you ever seen, do they have anything like that in Mexico at all, where they have?
Yes, they do have a few developments like that in Privadas, and it operates the exact same way. Very, very similar. A lot of them tend to have rental guarantees. Like normally when you see like a lot of Privadas, I shouldn't say that. Some of them do have rental guarantees of whatever percentage. And some of them, depending on how much of a down payment, and that's the key thing, it depends on how much you pay up front, right? So a lot of times to get the benefit that you're talking about, if you pay for, let's say 75% or 50%, or you pay early or early adopter, they give you those sort of guarantees, but they do exist. I've seen a few of them.
Yeah. Now, cards on the table, typically they're giving you a guarantee because they're taking something off the top. So you would usually make more than that if you were choosing to just do the work and rent yourself. But a lot of people as first-time investors like that security and that comfort of a guarantee, and knowing that, okay, this is the return I'm going to get. I don't have to do any work. There's some advantages to that being said. So we've got another question coming through in the chat. It says, can I travel to Mexico to manage my company investment property and deduct the travel costs as a business expense? Great question. I love it. The answer is potentially yes. And I've always got to put that caveat potentially, because it's got to meet the 3 standard criteria. You know, is it reasonable? Does it have the ability to help your business earn income? And is it not specifically disallowed by the Income Tax Act? Wouldn't it be specifically disallowed by the Income Tax Act? Would it have the ability to help your business earn income? Arguably, yes. Would it be reasonable? Arguably, yes. Are they, like, again, it's going to be how you wrap that in the right documentation. Because if all it is a bunch of pictures of you enjoying your property for a week and nothing done and accomplished, CRA may have something to say about that. But with well-documented and for the right reasons, I'd say absolutely more than reasonable to justify going down to work on and invest in your property. And here's another thing I would also contend with. You could reasonably justify going on a trip just to look at the properties as potential investment opportunities, right? So there's another potential way to justify a vacation down to Mexico, is make sure that you book some time with Chukwu here to to look at some properties, take some business cards, show the dates you went and looked at the properties, what your property is looking at, and why you were thinking of them as an investment for your corporation. And then if you spend a couple of hours each day sitting by the beach, you could probably still justify that whole trip. We got more questions coming through. So give me 1 second. I'm going to get to those. I want to mark these ones as done. If I purchase through the corp, then use myself, I have to declare fair market value for the rent when in GTA or Meridia. How do I determine what fair market rent is? Do I assume 2,600 a month for 2 bedrooms and Airbnb rates in Merida? So, you know, that's a little subjective as to what the fair market rates are. I would try to use someone who's knowledgeable in the market to give you an independent number on that. And this is it's a CYA cost, right? And it's left pocket, right pocket. It's going from you to you. And it's a bit of a cover your ass strategy. It's not that you have to do it, but it's something that we personally would recommend that you do. If the asset's owned by the corporation, just again to lock it in and show, hey, look, I'm not getting any personal benefit out of this. This is an investment. You know, I'm paying for it for the time that I am using it. And again, with seasonality, you would probably have very different rates for say New Year's Eve than you would have for the second week of January. So if you go during the slower seasons, ostensibly, you could probably justify a much lower rate that you're charging yourself. 2,600 a month in the GTA, I guess that's related to his last question. And again, the specifics on the number, I would work with whoever is your real estate agent on that to get a more realistic estimate of what you should use. And he's assuming that he's purchasing it through the corp and using it 3 months a year. And yeah, I think if you're going down for that length of time, 3 months a year, you definitely want to make sure that you're paying yourself a fair market value, or the risk would be quite high of the government coming back and saying, this isn't really an investment. This is a way for you to use your corporation to pay for your personal residence. So I would cover my ass on that one. And then last question, which we missed earlier. So if I keep the proceeds of sale in the corp, I still have to declare capital gains in the year of the sale. So yes, so even if you stay in the corp, you're going to pay capital gains in the corp at the corporate tax rate, which would be the 28%. So one of the other things too, and I know we've gone a little bit long, but I would love to, if we could, just circle back to some of the stuff that you've done in the community. And I'm hoping like you could tell me a little bit more about the Acres organization that you founded and what that's about. Because I think that's a pretty exciting thing that what you're building there, at least from my understanding of it. But maybe you can give us a bit of background on what that is.
Yeah, sure. It was something that I created that I did not want to create because I can be a terrible human being. I sort of fell into it. So what I noticed, you're in the real estate world, that you realize you have the have and you have the have-nots. So when I was doing some research, you know, always hear like, oh no, Black people can't afford homes, they don't have homes. I wanted to see why, like what exactly is happening. So when you start doing the research on it, you realize it goes a little bit deeper than just home ownership. Part of it is a lack of the education, financial education. Part of it, a lack of opportunity. Part of it is discrimination. So it factors in, for instance, I'll give an example. Some of the stats were pretty much saying that a Black male coming out of university is less likely to get hired for the same job than pretty much any other race, right? A Black woman tends to be more educated than any other race, but tends to be hired less than white women, white males, blah, 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 blah. So when you really start looking at it on a bigger picture, you tend to realize if you need a certain amount of income in order to afford a home in the GTA, but you're not getting the same opportunities to even get the job to allow you to afford a home in the first place, then that creates a barrier to entry. Now it results in other issues. So if you can't afford a home, then what are your options? Renting. Now, if all of a sudden rents keep on going higher and higher and higher with the cost of living and appreciation and inflation, etc., then what ends up happening? If you're not able to increase your income because of something that you can't control, now you're put in a very hard spot. Now you're dealing with homelessness and impoverishment and so forth. Now, if you look at any community where they're not giving an opportunity in order to work or even finish high school, because black boys tend to be punished more severe than any other race. If you're not even given a chance to even finish high school, then what happens in those communities, right? They tend to fall apart. It tends to be higher crime, higher issues, and so forth. Now you have higher policing, and now it's a big bloody circle that never really ends. It's a chain that makes no sense. So what I was trying to do, right? I mean, I had health issues, and I'm going back to it now, is that I'm trying to educate people the second that they're in junior high school, the second that they're young, tell them as much as possible about education, but it goes a little bit deeper. Also give them the idea that you can do something that you haven't seen before. When I was younger, I never saw black realtors. I thought all realtors were white males, right? So giving them the idea that there is something bigger out there, giving them an outlet to talk about what's happening, and pretty much encouraging more people to learn things like what you're talking about. I learned these things from school, economics, finance, accounting, and etc. So I understand exactly what it is you're talking about. The average person who hasn't gone to university or took something different in university will not know what you're talking about. They don't understand money. So that's why I was trying my best to sort of use real estate as a way to educate people on investments, educating people on refinancing, educating people on wealth, so that they can sort of balance things out instead of waiting for the government to bail them out. Because I always say this, if you're waiting for the government to help you out or give you a kickback or even do anything for you, you're already wasting your time. If the government can't even help the average Canadian, they're not going to help a minority group. It's not going to happen. So the only way to help yourself is
Financial
to help
literacy,
yourself.
education, and help and community support. And I think that, you're really onto something about the investing in the foreign countries as a stepping stone, because it makes it like almost, well, you hear so many young Canadians just saying home ownership is unattainable for me. It's just not even possible.
Right.
But that doesn't mean real estate investment is unattainable. And a great path to that is looking at other countries where entry into the market is a lot more affordable. You can start building up a portfolio and then maybe come back, to the Canadian market to be able to buy your property. Which brings in another question that we've got, probably our last question for the day. And Chris asks, are there still real estate opportunities today closer to home like the GTA?
It really depends on how much you can afford. So I will always say this, there are always opportunities when it comes to real estate. There are always opportunities when it comes to investments. The key thing is to do your research and see what you can afford and see if it makes sense, the exit strategy. So it has to all make sense to you. So depending on your income, I can say yes, based on your income, based on your risk analysis, here is something that's for you. So for instance, in Canada, I have a personal favorite when it comes to investments for a first-time homeowner. I would probably say semi-detached raised bungalows are my favorite investment when it comes here. The main reason why is that their rental rates tend to be very similar to a full bungalow or to a full home. Not to mention, you can rent out the top floor, you can rent out the basement. You can live on the top floor, rent out the basement, and the basement tends to have a full kitchen. It's above ground. So me personally, I see a semi-detached raised bungalow and I just go straight towards it. Yeah, so for first time, I mean, more established people are looking at more rooms and all that and getting homes. But if you're starting off for the first time, to me, those, regardless of if interest rates go up, interest rates go down, you would realize time and time again that those type of homes, they don't really drop as crazy as everything else. They tend to always goes up because you can always hedge your basement and rent it out. So there's always a market for it.
Now, what's your thoughts on pre-construction? Because, we saw, in the most recent past, a lot of people getting burned with pre-construction because they bought in when the market was high, and now interest rates went up, and now their homes aren't even being valued at what they paid for them. But doesn't that mean that the flip of that is true? If you're buying pre-construction, you're out 2 to 5 years, and construction, you're buying in now in 2 to 5 years. Real estate, or hopefully interest rates, have finally fallen and corrected, which would mean that you've got a highly leveraged investment where you're not putting up the majority of the money down now, with no cost of borrowing or very little cost of borrowing, and hopefully banking on the fact that interest rates are going to be coming down, which will then drive the value of the properties back up. That's, again, pure conjecture. I'm not a financial advisor, but that's what I've been sort of thinking about lately is like, hey, interest rates haven't dropped yet. When I renewed just in April, I went with a 3-year mortgage, which was I thought the best rate because it allowed me to pay the piper now, but have the opportunity to buy back in when I think interest rates will be better. I'm personally thinking that I think interest rates in 2 to 3 years will be much better, which we know that there is a direct connection between interest rates and market value. As interest
Right.
rates drop, prices go up. So if you're
Right.
buying pre-construction now and not having to pay that higher interest rate, because you're just putting a small down payment and the bulk's
Mhm.
not due until closing, and that's 2 to 5 years out. And when closing interest are dying over the title and you are taking it, your interest rate hopefully will be substantially lower, which will give you the opposite benefit of all these people who got hosed over the last couple of years. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Am I out to lunch there? Is that a good strategy?
No, you're not too you're not too far off. The only thing whenever I talk to anyone about pre-construction properties, is that you almost better have a crystal ball, or you have to be really good at analyzing charts, right? So about 2 years ago, I was telling people, do not buy pre-construction because I don't like the way things are going. Interest rates skyrocketing. You don't want to buy something at 700,000 because I know in the next 2 years when it gets completed, you're going to have a problem because it's going to be a devaluation. So I always say that whenever it comes to any investment that you're going to look at, you have to be able to project what the future value is going to be and what that market is going to be as well. So for instance, if someone gives me a product, I'll give you an example. So let's say, for instance, last year you have a product finishing next year, right? This year. Will that make any sense? Probably not, depending on when you get occupancy. Because if all of a sudden interest rates actually keep on going higher, and the market right now for condos are not good. So that's what you look at. If the condo market is very weak, you do not want to get a pre-construction condo. It's not smart. However, if you were to look at the cycles, the cycle for real estate is normally within 7 years. It goes up for about 3 years in a bit, and it goes back down again, goes up and down again. So if you're watching the market as a whole and you're seeing that, okay, maybe we finish another 3-year cycle, determine if you're at the bottom or if you're at the top. If you're at the bottom and you believe in the next 3 years is going to be positive, that is when you buy. So pre-construction right now, as you're saying, right now is not the worst time to get it done, but you still got to keep an eye of the condo market in the area that you're living in, that you plan to buy in, to see exactly what's happening and how they tend to perform. So most condos, like if there's a new area, condos have been built before. You can look back into the past and see how did they perform the last time there was an interest rate increase and see what happened after when the rates dropped. So use past historical data and that will tell you what needs to be done. And the same thing that other concern too, policy changes. So it's not just about the interest rates. You have to keep in mind policy changes. So for instance, if all of a sudden the capital gains that just dropped on us, the second dwelling, rule that they have in Toronto, the occupancy tax, etc. Any policy change can any policy change can affect your investment. So what you're banking on is that the next 3 to 5 years that there's not going to be a policy change that's going to affect your portfolio. And you also have to really hope that the interest rates make sense. And you have to basically hope that there isn't a high supply of properties in that area, that everyone's on the same page. I'm going to offload this property at the exact same time. So there's a bit more than you have to really know how to read the market before you do that.
And the reality is here is, again, for those who know my dad's story, he had millions of dollars of real estate in the late 70s and 80s and went bankrupt because interest rates went up and they put in rent controls. And to be honest, we're seeing very, very similar economic climate right now. You've got all these people complaining about the rental market. The government's going to do something about that. What are they going to do? I don't know, but it's probably not going to be good for the landlords. That much I can be certain of. And so again, to your point of, diversification into other countries where you have more favorable terms for landlords, again, brings some merit. But with that, we're already like 5 minutes past time. So thank you for joining us. And I know, Joe, you had another questions about, real estate investments versus REITs versus other investment instruments. We'll table that for another conversation. The one thing I will say about REITs, which are, a different type of investment where you're not banking on capital gain, you're banking on usually dividends or interest as a form of return. They're great from a cash flow perspective. They're not banking on a capital gain typically, at least not nearly as significantly. And that's the difference between investing in the stock market versus investing in a tangible physical property that you own. And I'm all for REITs. in the right circumstances. But I know a lot of our clients really do like the physical. I want to own land. I want to own
Right.
a home. I want to see it with my own eyes, which is not quite the same with REITs, even though they do own land and you own a piece of a company that owns land. But
Right.
on that note, again, thank you so much for joining us, Chukwu. You did a great job. How can people get in touch with you if they are interested in learning more about the maritime market or real estate investing?
Oh yeah, no worries. You can always let me check for everyone. You can always send us an email at contact@surluckhomes.com. So it's contact at SIRLUCKHOMES.com. So just send us an email and we'll definitely get back to you. So that's contact@surluckhomes.com. And or yeah, I would say that's probably the easiest way to get a hold
That's
of
the
me.
best
And
way.
plus I'm all over the internet. Or just Google Surluck Homes. You will
Yeah.
find us in a million ways. So it's
Okay.
not that difficult.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. And we'll have to have you back with an update when with see how some of these investments are going.
Andrew, honestly, thank you so much for the invitation. This was fun. I really enjoyed it. I would love to come back again.
Yeah, we got lots of thank yous. Excellent session. And Rachel says she'll forward all the info to attendees. And someone wants to know if you've got opportunities in Dominica. So I'll let you reach out and connect with them directly. And again, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Bye for now,
You're
Chukwu, and
welcome.
bye for now, everyone.
Okay, take care. Have a good one, guys.